This video is brought to you by Blinkist. Now look, it's not always easy to find the time to sit down, read all the books you want. Look, I'm a pretty busy dude myself, so I understand that. I don't read as much as I would like, I don't read as much as I used to. It's all a bit of a shame, but good news, I've got Blinkist, which is this app that you can download, and in this app there are 15-minute summaries of all the best non-fiction books. Over 3,000 of them in total. You can either read them or listen to them, both options there. For me, I listen 90% of the time. Like, it's easy to fit into the day like that. Commute to work or, just doing little tasks around the house. It's pretty perfect. Also, 12 million active users currently use Blinkist, and they're getting the best insights and need-to-know info from thousands of books. Self-help, to business, to health, whatever you're into, it's on there. They also have excellent curated lists where the Blinkist team and also guests have put together some specific recommendations, like, what have we got here? How to future-proof yourself? That's a good one. And also, staff favorites, of course. You want to know what they think. And of course, you can download all of these, listen to them, read them offline. It's all pretty fantastic. I've read a bunch of stuff on here. They're 15 minutes, they're easy to whip through, and it's just very dense information. The first 100 people to go to blinkist.com/VisualPolitik will get 1 week to try it out. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership, and let's get into it. If we mention espionage, it'll likely trigger movie scenes starring Sean Connery, Roger Moore, or Pierce Brosnan. I mean, who doesn't remember Agent 007's classic Aston Martin?
Windscreen bulletproof.
However, fortunately or unfortunately, the truth is that real-world espionage has little to do with the crazy and glamorous life of James Bond. It makes sense. I mean, who in their right mind would go to see a movie in which Pierce Brosnan spent 120 minutes listening to phone calls or collecting metadata? And that's what it boils down to. From ancient Rome to the present day, this has basically been the mission of intelligence services: to know what is being said and who is saying it. Yes, Julius Caesar may not have had powerful computer equipment or satellites at his disposal, but he was spared several times from death thanks to having a powerful network of informants at his service. In fact, it's even been said that he might have been aware of the conspiracy that finally ended his life. For another example, the French Revolution started by Robespierre and company most likely would not have been possible without an intelligence network either, not at least in the way that it occurred. The revolutionary government had intelligence committees spread across the country that were dedicated to identifying, monitoring, and arresting any noble, foreign or Frenchman, who returned from abroad and would be against the movement. To give you an idea, some historians estimate that the number of people monitored by this huge network is almost 500,000. But we're going to jump from the 18th century to 2013. That year, a leak from a technology consultant, a until then unknown Edward Snowden, shook all the seats of power in Washington. Through journalists from the Washington Post and The Guardian, the National Security Agency employee leaked documents classified as top secret, revealing the existence of several intelligence programs that collected metadata from US citizens in bulk. But what exactly were these programs? What is the NSA really? And what role did 9/11 play in terms of privacy? Well, watch closely, because in this video, we're going to answer all of these questions.
The Secret Agency.
On the 20th of May 1949, then US Secretary of Defense Louis A. Johnson created the AFSA, the Armed Forces Security Agency. Its purpose was to coordinate all electronic communications and intelligence findings of the different agencies belonging to the armed forces, agencies such as the Air Force Security Service or the Marine Security Group. However, the AFSA was a resounding failure. The rivalry between the different agencies was so great that in the end they never shared all the information with a central organization. It is precisely for this reason, and because the AFSA had ended up being totally inoperative and unable to respond to the needs posed by the new Cold War, that President Truman decided in June 1952 to make a stand and mount something completely new. In this way, he authorized the creation of a new secret agency. He did it through a confidential memo, specifically at the ends of the 7th page of the document. They were brief lines that would change the history of espionage in North America forever. Can you imagine Truman dictating the document to his secretary? After 6 pages, all of a sudden, oh, hey, yes, look, also put in the point where we're going to create that mega agency, but, don't let anyone know, especially not Congress, please. Anyway, that's how the NSA was born, very sneakily. However, it would not be until more than 20 years later that it was publicly known that this agency even existed. In fact, it was learned about by investigations carried out in 1975 by the Senate into the possible abuses of US intelligence services. It was then that the Church Committee revealed that there was an agency with a multi-million-dollar budget, an agency that no one had ever heard of. Even the senators themselves did not give credence to the scale that the NSA had reached. And you see, unlike the CIA, which was created through Congress, the NSA had been launched directly by the executive branch, that is, by the United States government itself. For decades, the White House carried out painstaking work that let it go completely unnoticed, while the organization kept growing and growing. Even in Congress, they couldn't believe it. They had just discovered that the NSA, a virtually unknown organization, was not only a larger agency than the CIA itself, but was in fact larger than all the other intelligence agencies combined. To get an idea of its size, the last known fact is that in 1978, and despite the cuts brought by the end of the Vietnam War, the NSA workforce amounted to 68,203 employees. This is more than half of Apple's employees worldwide. And remember, all of this was done in absolute secrecy.
Despite its size and power, no law has ever been enacted prohibiting the NSA from engaging in any activity. There are only laws to prohibit the release of any information about the agency. No statute establishes the NSA or defines the permissible scope of its responsibilities. Frank Church, former Senate Intelligence Committee chairman.
And if this already seems surprising, well, hold on, because the story doesn't end here. The Senate also discovered that the NSA had dedicated itself to tapping the phones of nearly 1,700 US citizens. Even back in 1969, the Nixon administration came to name this particular list of people to watch. It would be known as Operation Minaret. It was a scandal. Such prominent characters as Martin Luther King, Jane Fonda, and Muhammad Ali were part of this curious NSA blacklist. In fact, the paranoia of the Nixon administration was such that they even engaged in spying on their own people. For example, well-known Tennessee Republican Senator Howard Baker, who became majority leader in the Senate and was later President Ronald Reagan's chief of staff, was also on the NSA's list of suspects. In 1978, and probably as a result of discovering the opaque and controversial workings of the NSA, Congress approved the so-called Fisa, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Fisa legally put brakes on the NSA's freedom to listen to who they wanted from that point on. Since the passing of that law, the NSA could only intercept, i.e. listen to, communications that took place abroad, expressly prohibiting surveillance of US citizens, except in the case of those acting as spies from other countries. In order to gain Fisa's approval to initiate citizen monitoring, the NSA needed to obtain a court order, which, all seems pretty reasonable. Well, but hang on a moment, because there was an event that would completely change the boundaries of this agency.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
The day that changed everything.
There is a date on the calendar that would mark a turning point for the US National Security Agency, September the 11th, 2001. Nearly 2 decades after that fateful day, we can almost certainly say that 9/11 has been the most consequential terrorist operation in human history. On that day, 19 jihadists, 3,000 innocent lives, an iconic building, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and 4 passenger planes disappeared from the face of the earth. But not only that, there was a lot that was not destroyed, but was damaged. In some cases, forever. Thousands of wounded, the strategic Pentagon building, and a country that would never be the same again. 9/11 disrupted the political agenda of the Bush administration, and we're not just talking about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Congress practically gave then-President Bush a blank check to use the armed forces in any way he deemed necessary to persecute and punish anyone who had been involved in the attacks. And that wasn't all. A month after 9/11, Congress passed the Patriot Act, a law that empowered them to fight terrorism with the same tactics that they could employ to fight organized crime or drug trafficking. For example, thanks to the Patriot Act, agents could gain access to a terrorist's suspected call history, travel plans, or any other information available from other federal agencies.
Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans. With my signature, this law will give intelligence and law enforcement officials important new tools to fight a present danger.
But it didn't end there. If 9/11 had definitely been a slap in the face for someone, it was a slap in the face for the intelligence agencies. And the answer was clear: more intelligence was needed. In 2002, President Bush signed a presidential secret order, an order allowing the NSA to monitor calls and emails from thousands of US citizens and legal residents without having to seek a court order. It was the birth of the Stellar Wind program. But the icing on the cake came in 2005 with the appointment of a new director for the NSA, the man who signified a new era in the history of the NSA and, by extension, the history of espionage.
A cowboy in Washington.
On August 1st, 2005, General Keith Alexander was appointed as the 16th director of the NSA, serving in office for a total of 9 years. No director of the agency has ever served that long, and of course, no director has had so much power in his hands before. This character's ambition was simply unprecedented.
Alexander tended to be a bit of a cowboy. Let's not worry about the law. Let's just figure out how to get the job done, says a former intelligence official. He said at one point that a lot of things aren't clearly legal, but that doesn't make them illegal. A former military intelligence officer who served under Alexander at INSCOM.
Apparently, Alexander seems like the perfect guy for the job. He was a senior decorated intelligence officer, a graduate of West Point who specialized in physics and technology. For example, during the Iraq War, he pioneered tools to monitor all communications, calls, emails, messages coming out of Iraq in real time. However, his predecessor, former NSA Director General Michael Hayden, could not stand the sight of Alexander. Of course, Alexander had not one, but two aces up his sleeve to take the top seat. First, he knew Hayden hated then Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, so he made Rumsfeld his first target. And second, he knew how to move around Washington like a fish in water. Let's just say he knew how to charm the people he needed to in order to achieve all of his goals. The now four-star general was running an intelligence command in Virginia near Washington. To give you an idea of the kind of person we're talking about, he set up a Hollywood-like set in those facilities, specifically a replica of the Star Trek Enterprise's command post. But okay, you might be wondering, why on earth did he do that? Well, from this command post, he controlled the screens and computers of his so-called Information Domain Center. And not just that. In this way, every time he invited a politician to tour the facility, he ended up seating his guest in the seat belonging to the captain of the Enterprise. And you know what? Politicians freaked out. They gave in. They loved it. Yes, it's hard to believe, but with techniques like this, General Alexander somehow managed to get everyone on his side. And yes, that's also how he became the director of the powerful NSA. But let's not get distracted. The fact is that during Alexander's long tenure, one of his main objectives was to renew the agency technologically. Perhaps one of the characters that best illustrates the changes that occurred in this organization is Edward Snowden. And with Alexander at the helm, the agency was filled with fresh young personnel. Overnight, 20-somethings were walking around the NSA facilities with levels of access that even the most senior agents had never gained. The digital age had arrived.
I was decades younger than the help desk folks, and heading past them into a vault to which they didn't have access and never would. Edward Snowden.
With its new payroll signings, Alexander revamped the NSA and began carrying out new espionage programs. One of the most controversial was the Prism program. With it, the NSA began storing information from the internet and technology companies. Emails, video chats, social media messages, everything was within reach of agency analysts to look for clues about new terrorist threats. In fact, so much information was stored by this agency that the NSA ran out of storage capacity on its 141 hectares at Fort Meade. They had to expand their hard drive by setting up a facility in the middle of the Utah desert that cost them more than $2 billion. But do you know how many people are estimated to have been monitored by the NSA with this program? How many terror suspects? Well, it's estimated that the amount could run to tens of millions of Americans. Yep, that's right, tens of millions. But wait a minute, how did the NSA legally justify monitoring so many people? Well, as the saying goes, where there's a law, there's a loophole. Chris Inglis, the deputy director of the agency, stated in Congress that when a potential terrorist was under surveillance, communications from people related to them were investigated up to a third degree of connection. And of course, if we take into account that a recent study conducted by the University of Milan in conjunction with Facebook estimated that at present we are all connected with about 4.7 degrees of separation, then the 3 degrees used by the NSA does look a bit, let's say, excessive. It was a bit of a joke because in practice they just had free rein to investigate whoever they wanted.
Alexander. He had all these diagrams showing how this guy was connected to that guy and to that guy, says a former NSA official who heard Alexander give briefings on the floor of the Information Dominance Center. Some of my colleagues and I were skeptical. Later, we had a chance to review the information. It turns out that all that those guys were connected to were pizza shops. A retired military officer who worked with Alexander.
All this got very much out of hand for the NSA. Document leaks revealed that more than 10 million phone calls were intercepted in Spain and France alone. In fact, many of you may remember this embarrassing moment during the Obama administration.
Barack Obama approved tapping Angela Merkel's phone 3 years ago. President Barack Obama was told about monitoring of German Chancellor in 2010 and allowed it to continue. Telegraph.
Merkel's phone, emails of the then president of Mexico, Felipe Calderon, and 35 other heads of state. The extent of the program was such that Snowden himself began to recognize that there were NSA employees who were spying on their ex-partners or whoever they wanted with absolute impunity. According to the agency itself, the benefits have been quite small compared to the cost and resources used. It seems that using such a large amount of data in practice was not easy. Let's say that at the moment of reckoning, the program was used more to spy on the girlfriends of agency employees and things like that than it was used to fight terrorism, and well, also spying on political leaders like Merkel. But how can we be sure that this no longer continues? In any case, the agreed goal was not to violate the privacy of millions of people around the world and to spend billions of dollars in the process. Anyway, that is the story of one of the most covert intelligence agencies in the world, an agency that for more than 20 years was de facto hidden even to the United States Congress, an agency whose daily activities we have no idea about, but we do know that it was able to unscrupulously violate the privacy of millions of innocent citizens, among them businessmen, politicians, and journalists. And that should cause us to ask ourselves a few questions. Do you think it is appropriate for a government-dependent body to have such a degree of freedom? Would you be willing to sacrifice all your privacy to supposedly strengthen national security? What control do you think that these kind of agencies should have? Well, leave us your answers in the comments below. Also, soon here at VisualPolitik, we're going to tell you more details about this world, so don't forget to subscribe. And of course, if you found this interesting, please do hit that thumbs up button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.